Thank you for joining me. I'm Madeline Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show all about building the resilient leader in you. You know, in every career, there comes a time when you have to make a presentation or give a speech. Preparing for that moment is as important as developing your job competence. Frank DiBartolomeo will talk about preparing for that moment. Frank is an award-winning speaker, professional member of the National Speakers Association, Toastmasters International member for over 30 years, and founder and president of DiBartolomeo Consulting International, where he helps technical professionals improve their presentation skills, persuasion skills, and personal presence. In 2002, he was awarded Toastmasters International's highest award, Distinguished Toastmaster. He's also the author of the book Speak Well and Prosper, Tips, Tools, and Techniques for Better Presentations. And after my conversation with Frank, we'll have grounds for thought about another way to prepare for speaking. So stay tuned. Frank, welcome to Unlocked.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. I am so looking forward to our conversation. You know, speaking is so important to all of us. I would never in my wildest dreams imagine that I would be running a TV show, but here I am. So who can tell where things will lead? You know, I've always been told that public speaking was important, but there have been times in my career when I never had to speak to an audience. I mean, literally, I was in my little corner and that's what I did. What can a person do with public speaking skills besides stand up and speak to audiences?
Well, that's a great question, but public speaking skills can be used in a variety of communication situations. All the skills I teach about gestures, body language, vocal variety, all those can be applied to delivering a presentation to an audience or to speaking one-on-one with someone. So all those types of things that we'll be talking about have applicability throughout the whole spectrum of communication.
Now that's exciting. That means we don't waste our time doing A in order to do B. Right. Well, I'm always curious about how guests find themselves where they are in their careers. I mean, I just told you, I never thought I'd be on TV, but what drew you to public speaking?
Well, in 1990, I was a newly divorced captain in the Air Force, and I had a little bit of time to look at my sorely needed circumspection of my life. And I realized that my public speaking would determine how high and how fast I advanced in my career. And I'm by no means the only person for that. That applies to almost everyone. On the 9th of January, I'm an engineer, so I'm into numbers. On the 9th of January, 1990, I entered my first Toastmasters meeting. The Wright Flyers Toastmasters in Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. I entered the meeting thinking I was a pretty good public speaker. However, I left the meeting 1 hour later realizing how much I had to learn, and I've been learning ever since. It's been a lifelong learning experience with me.
That's really a telling story, that you wake up and discover you really need to work on communication. Great story. All right. Well, so let's get immediately into some meat here, because I have a lot of wonderful people in the audience, usually between the ages of, roughly 25 to 55, although there are people that are younger and older as well. They're in the middle of their careers. So how does one prepare for speech, and what are the steps or the stages or practices that lead to a good performance? Because it really is a performance when you're speaking, especially to a group. What are the pieces or the parts that need to be considered? I'm going to give you some time, Frank. Just take over and answer that.
Okay, I have a lot to say, as you probably know. First of all, how does one prepare for speech? The first question is, do you have a topic? If you don't have a topic, it's a little more work, but even if you do have a topic, it's still work, but maybe a little bit easier. Uh, I use what Brian Tracy calls, he's a self development author. I use what he calls mindstorming, which is a little bit like brainstorming, but it's done alone and it's very fast. Uh, what mindstorming is basically where, let's say you don't have a topic, you're in your Toastmasters club and you have to decide on what topic you're going to speak on, and you don't have a topic right now. Take out a blank sheet of paper, number 1 to 20 on all the lines, and then in 1 minute, no longer, 1 minute, write down all the desires that you have, all the hobbies that you'd like to do, what you'd like to do with your life, so on and so forth. Okay. Now, at the end of 1 minute, you may have 10, you may have 15, you may have 20 ideas. Take one of those ideas, your most desirable idea, put that at the top of another piece of paper that's blank, 1 to 20 for each of the lines. And then in, you guessed it, 1 minute, just write as many ideas as you can about that topic. Now, you're not done yet. After the mind storming, we're going to do what I call cards on the wall. Now, why is it cards on the wall? Because take each of those topics that are on the second list, put them on a card or a post-it note, usually square post-it notes are okay, and put them up on a wall someplace. Now that you've seen the totality of the ideas that you've come up with yourself through the mindstorming exercise, you'll magically, and it's really, I think it's magic, you'll see certain groups, certain of those topics come together and say, this topic goes with that topic, these three topics go together there, so on and so forth. And then if you can, and I'm going to get to the power of three a little bit later on, if you can put them in three groups, that would be good. And then title each of those three groups. Then the titles of those three groups become the major points, the three major points of your speech or presentation. And go ahead. You have a question?
I'm just sitting here thinking that is such a powerful exercise to do.
It is.
And you really can do it yourself. You're absolutely right. And
It is. And I did not come up with this exercise, but I use it all the time when I'm faced with. I also have a template for my speeches, and we'll get into openings and bodies and closing. But it's just like English composition class in high school. I know some of you didn't like that, but what did they tell you to do? They said before you write a paper or before you write an opening or a closing to a paper, or a introduction and a closing, is you have to write the body, because how can you write the introduction if you don't know what the body is? So you have to come up with that body first. That's really, really important. I basically divide my creation of a presentation into, guess, there's that three number again.
Yeah.
You'll see that coming up again, into three parts. There's the before the presentation. This is not rocket science. During the presentation, and then after the presentation. When people think of presentations, they mostly think of the middle part, the delivery of it. But there's a heck of a lot that happens before you actually present it, if you're going to do this right and have a successful presentation. And there's a lot you can do afterwards. I'm going to be talking about and I get no remuneration from this, but I recently used a software product called Talkadot, and I'll talk to you about why that's important a little bit later. So before the presentation, you do the mind storming, you do the cards on the wall. So you have your basic body of your presentation, and I recommend bullet points. One of my mentors, Earl Nightingale's, always said, "Speak ideas, not words." Some people write down their speech verbatim, and by the time they get to doing the actual speech, they may still have the actual written words. And what happens when you read words is you have verbal faux pas, you have misplaced, you misplace where in the reading you are. And really, the barest you can come up with bullet points and make them phrases, but no sentences, just phrases, that will that will bring out your personality. And that's another good point. We are our most credible when we are ourselves, believe it or not. It is a performance, but it's a performance of who we are already. So that's really important. And then once you have the body somewhat together, you have to talk about the opening and the closing. And the opening, the first part of the opening is always, how do you get the attention of your audience? Because that's really important for audience engagement and whether they're even going to get your message or think about the laundry list or their shopping list or whatever type thing. So you have to worry about that. So, attention getter. Now, what are some attention getters? Stories, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. Stories are always, I think they're the best attention getters.
Mm.
And the way to tell a story is not to say, I'm going to tell you a story.
Mm-mm.
It's just to say the story.
Right.
Just to, I walked into that room on January 9th, 1990 and thought I knew everything. And I left knowing I didn't know a whole lot. That type of thing. Personal stories are the best because the audience is already convinced of the facts because you've lived it. So
Mm.
that's really important. And then you need to give your audience a presentation roadmap. You would not go from Centerville, Virginia, where I live, to Chicago, Illinois, unless you had a map, or now we have GPS, but it's the same sort of thing. You wouldn't say, well, it's kind of like northwest, and I'm just going to start driving northwest and see where I come. No, nobody does that. And your audience, without this roadmap, will be wondering, where is this speaker going? And what the roadmap does is it gives them that in a very high level, but just enough that keeps them interested. Now, closings are somewhat the openings in reverse. You've gone through your main points, and now you have to summarize. And I always recommend. We used to have something in the Air Force, and I think it's kind of gone out there to the civilian world too. Tell them what you're going to tell them in the opening. Tell them that's your body, and then tell them what you told them. And that's at least the first part of the closing. And then you need to have what I call the get off the stage rhetorical advice. Could be
Mm.
a story, could be a quote, startling statistic. It could be something else also. So there's lots of different. In my book, I talk about this. It could be lots of different ways that you get off the stage. Usually, leaving the audience with a poignant thought is very good, so that they can. That of course is relevant to your topic, so that
Mhm.
they can get off stage. So that's neat. Then and again, I'm still before the presentation part. We're still preparing. Then practice. Okay. I usually ask my audiences, has anybody played the piano? Okay. A few people raise their hand. Did you start when you were a kid? Yeah, I started when I was a kid. Did you come home thinking, I can't wait to get to practice that piano? Now, your mother was there telling you, practice that piano and you don't come back until, it's a half an hour and I want to hear some keys and things like that.
Mhm.
Okay? It's somewhat the same thing uh, with presentations. However, as adults, we already know that practice again doesn't make perfect, but it does make permanent, as Brian Tracy says. So the more we practice, the better we will become. And to us, it may seem so gradual that we don't see a difference, but to somebody that sees the presentation, it's going to make a huge difference.
Frank, I want to interrupt you for just a sec
Absolutely.
because this is what's coming to my mind. This aspect of this careful preparation of the content, which you just went over. I loved it. I mean, I've written a lot of books, and this is the kind of thing you do normally for a book. But I
Yes.
can see there's a real use to an presentation as well. Um, the the other aspect that occurs to me as you were talking is as you're writing, now in this case, it's the book, you're writing the book, you actually learn your topic by writing it. And what I'm hearing you, even though you didn't use that word, I think as you practice your speech, you are actually learning the content yourself. And I
Oh,
think that's what you
absolutely.
meant by permanent. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it might have been Albert Einstein. The person that said it is escaping me now, but they said, if you really want to learn a subject, teach it.
Teach it. Absolutely.
Teach it. My wife is doing that right now. She's a professor over at Northern Virginia Community College, and she's gotten to know integration by parts and other math topics really, really well.
Yep.
Yeah. Um, did you have anything else to say? I was
No,
going to.
no, I just wanted to make that connection because it's a really, really important one. And
Yeah.
it's one of the things that even, I mean, I know this thing about practicing. I understand it. And yet it just gives me more incentive to do it again and again.
Hmm. Oh, yeah. I'm going to talk about how to practice a little bit later on, I
Ah,
think.
good.
Um, so we use in Toastmasters, they use and I'm not selling Toastmasters here. I'm using it as an example.
Hmm.
We use something called gradual desensitization. This can be used for good or for evil, but let's talk about the good. So, what we try to do in each Toastmasters meeting is everyone in the meeting, could be 20 people, could be 25 people, gets up and says something. Hi, my name is Frank, or you're the timer, and you give the timing of so on and so forth. And what that does is, over time, it gradually desensitizes the person to the fear
Yeah.
of actually getting up and saying something in a crowd,
Yeah.
even though what they're saying is maybe pretty simple and so on and so forth. And that's where, and then the ultimate is actually giving a speech in a Toastmasters meeting type thing. So that's really important, gradual desensitization. And that's why practicing many times, number one, tells you what will work and what won't work, but it also gives you the strength to actually give the speech. And it really doesn't. When you think about it, the person that's giving the speech is the most knowledgeable person in the room about that. And another thing I tell people is, especially when we're talking about fear, is that I've never met anyone that goes to see a speech or a musical performance that is really thinking in their head, I've come here today hoping that that person really is unsuccessful. I never heard that from anybody. So the audience is with you. The
Yeah.
audience is
Yeah.
with you. And unless you pick out little faux pas that you have in your talk, your speech, or your presentation, they will not notice it. So that's another thing. Hey, let's. So we've talked about before the presentation. Let's talk about during the presentation. I got a number of things here. Number one is you are the message. It's
Mm.
not your slides. It's not somebody that came with you to support you. You are the message. The narrative is extremely important. And that's what you need to practice on. One of the things that you need to practice on during your practice sessions to get that smoothest down, that type of thing. So you are the message. The second thing is, and I mentioned it before, you already have credibility. First of all, make sure that you're the one that writes your introduction because you're the one that knows who you are and and can put the facts in there that are relevant to the audience that you are presenting to. So you are credible until you lose that credibility, and there are ways to do that. One way is to uh, tell the audience about all the faux pas that will happen in your presentation, and they will happen. The key is don't tell the audience; they won't notice. And sometimes they will, something goes wrong with the video or whatever, but sometimes it's best to just laugh with the audience, and you'll see more human to them, and they'll listen to you more. Gestures are really important, and they're very hard on doing it virtually, which we've seen.
Yeah.
So gestures are incredibly important, and they really emphasize different parts of your speech. Eye contact. Remember the last time that you talked to somebody one on one, and they weren't exactly looking at you. What did you think? Let me ask you, Madeline. What did you think when if somebody did that?
They're thinking about something else. They're
They're
not
thinking
they're
about
not listening to me
right.
necessarily. I mean, they may think they're listening to me, but they're really thinking about somebody else or
Okay.
something else.
Yeah. You may even think they're a little bit dishonest. Are they telling you the truth?
Mhm.
So that may be something that you know what you want to work on eye contact. And eye contact. This is the way to do eye contact for an audience. Obviously, you have a left side, you have a middle, and you have a right side. Don't don't do one after the other. Kind of mix it up, and you don't have to look at everybody in the audience, but pick out
Yeah.
certain people
Yeah.
that are different places in the audience, and you'll have this one down. Vocal variety is another one. And by vocal variety, what do I mean? I mean the pitch of your voice. I mean the rate of your voice, putting in pauses.
Mhm.
All those types of things can be very powerful when we speak. So that's very important. Body language. There was a
Let let
study.
me let me let
Yeah,
me
yeah,
talk about that.
absolutely. Go ahead.
That business about pausing. That is one of the hardest things that I had to learn was that was that you had to pause in order, if nothing else, for the audience to be able to process what you just said. You know,
Absolutely.
in music, we have they're called rests. Uh, there's all kinds of things that are designed in our society to allow us to give our brains time to process what they just heard. But
Mhm.
I think in speaking, it's you just feel like, oh my God, I got to keep telling them something. I got to keep telling them something. When in fact, you can pause. Yeah.
Definitely. Someone that's speaking fast when they're talking is a symptom of someone that hasn't practiced enough. And the reason for that is that they, just like you said, they feel like they have to include everything in the kitchen sink, and you don't have to. And you know the saying, less is more. Less really is more. There's basically two reasons you'd use pauses. Number one is for emphasis.
Mhm.
Number two is sometimes, even though you only have bullets, you may lose your thoughts and where you want to go.
Yeah.
Audiences appreciate you stop talking, just stopping talking, and regroup, and then continue. That is really, really a powerful thing. Pauses. Um, Body language. I was starting to say there was a professor in Moravian from UCLA did a study one time of what is the percentage contribution of body language or tone of voice and the actual words you use. Now, he came up with percentages, and you can argue about the percentages, but the bottom line is that body language is incredibly important. Now, in this venue, virtually, it's harder because you can't see from my chest down, and I may be dancing here. Who knows? But but you can't see that, so it's hard to use that. And you can stay back from the when I see people do speeches in Toastmasters contests, people usually stand back and they make sure that they're in the frame.
Mhm.
But the way that we're talking now, it's very hard to do that.
Yeah.
I'm doing all sorts of gestures down here, but you can't see them. By the way, with gestures, make sure you don't get your hand close to the camera. So keep your gestures very close to your body. So body language is incredibly important. Some common delivery errors. Everybody's worried about the ahs and ums. I can, would you believe I can cure you of that two times when you do it? And the way I do that, and only do it in the practice session, get one of those New Year's Eve clickers
Mhm.
and tell somebody in the audience when I say when I say when I say any kind of verbal faux pas, I want you to click that. By the second click, you're thinking, I do not want that third click to come on.
I love that.
So,
What?
so that is an easy way. And again, don't do it in the actual presentation. You don't want a
Mhm.
clicker going on, but that is an easy way, and you'll wind up that you'll start pausing to
Mm.
get your thought in line,
Yeah.
just what we talked about before. So that's a very, very
I,
interesting.
I really like that technique because there's no judgment in it.
Right,
It's just, this is what I heard, click. This is what I heard, click.
right,
And so you're not dealing with they don't like what I'm doing, they're better than me. None of that. It's just
right,
yeah, facts. Okay.
right. Which I'll digress just a quick second. I'm reading I'm taking a course for the International Coaching Federation certification, but they wanted us to read this book called, now let me see if I can remember it. It's called If You Ask the Right Question, or Ask the Right Questions and You'll Change Your Life. I forget what it's called, but it's something like that. And she talks about the judger road and the learner road.
Ah,
And taking the learner road is much more fruitful. The judger role, and it'd be surprised, even the kindest person against judging something during their day. But it's a great book. I'll have to get you the title of it. When things go wrong, I just have a couple of others on during the presentation. When things go wrong, and they will,
yeah.
in your practice, think about all the things that can go wrong, and then either mentally or on paper, which is better, have a backup plan. My computer goes out with my presentation. What am I going to do? Have a backup plan for that.
Mhm.
When I drop my papers and they're all out of order, just pick them up and put them in order. Take a pause, put them in order, and that's your backup plan. I saw this work at a National Speakers Association meeting one time. This gentleman was giving a 2.5 hour presentation and lots of different things in there, and his projection went out. So what did he do? He immediately went to small group exercises.
Ah,
And then in the 10 minutes for the small group exercise, we had our discussion in our small groups. He was able to fix his problem. And then we went on. There was nothing, there was no time wasted. He was going to do the exercise anyway. He just did it a little bit earlier than he wanted to. But he didn't tell us that. He didn't have to tell us that. We knew that's what his backup plan was. It was
that is brilliant. You have, Frank, I've done a lot of speaking and I've never thought about that aspect of having as a backup plan at any moment. Oh, I love it.
exactly, exactly, yeah. Then the question and answer period. That's the last part that I'm going to talk about during. A lot of people uh, really are fearful of the question and answer period.
Mm.
A large part of that is because they believe they will not know the answer. Okay, that's a fear that I think everybody has. So in your practice sessions, when you have your live audience, you tell them, "I want you to ask every possible question there could be on this topic." And then if I don't know the answer, I'm going to write down the question. I'm going to find out the answer. Because the chances of you being asked a question you haven't heard after going through that exercise is pretty much slim and none. However, you may find a question that you don't know. The key is to immediately say, I don't know.
No.
But if you give me your email address at the break, within 24 hours, I will have a question for you, or I'll have an answer for you. And that makes it increases your credibility. Excuse me. It shows that you want to help the audience. As far as the hostile question, a lot of people don't want. Every once in a while, you get a hostile questioner. The best thing is to not get down to their level.
Yeah.
Just stay at the high road, and eventually the audience will self-correct that person.
The audience always knows. The audience reads it better than you do. And
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
it's amazing. It's amazing. You're absolutely correct.
It
And
is.
and they will sanction that person. They-
You want the audience to be on your side.
right.
And if you start attacking the heckler, guess what?
No.
He's a heckler, but he's our heckler. So now we're going to attack you.
Right, right. It
So
never
that's
works.
never a good way to do it if you're a
Never
speaker.
works.
Always take the high
You
road.
know, it's interesting that you say that people don't want to do Q&A. I love Q&A because for me, and I always say this up at the very beginning, look, you may ask me something I don't know, but that gives me a chance to learn something as well. You may see something that I don't, and I just love it.
Absolutely. The key to being a great presenter is to know your audience. And a great way to know your audience is to have them ask questions. I I never leave questions until the end, and it's depending on the speaker. Some speakers like to leave questions to the end. I never do that. I never do that.
How do you deal with it then?
I basically say at the beginning, I'll allow questions, throughout. If it looks like we're getting into a time issue, I may ask you to see me at the break.
Ah,
And the reason for that is that when somebody encounters something in the presentation, they want to know an answer right away.
yeah.
And you're going to get off the topic where they were asking a question for if you wait till the end to answer that question.
Mhm.
And a lot of times, maybe even the majority of times, they won't ask the question again.
I always refer to that as a learning moment for the person who's asking the question. They really want to learn at that moment. And if you miss it, then
Absolutely.
they miss the learning as well.
Absolutely. And sometimes you don't get questions, you get statements.
Yes. Yes.
People like to talk, okay,
Mhm.
and mostly extroverts, of course. Sometimes you just have to say, I appreciate what you're saying, but we need to move on.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get the irrelevant question that has nothing to do with your topic or is so tangential that
Yeah.
it's really not going to enter the class. And you can say something like, I appreciate that. Let me talk to you at the break, and we
Yeah.
can talk more about that
Uh,
type of thing. After the presentation, just briefly, uh, always, if you can, get an evaluation from the audience, and that's where this. I just tried out this Talkadot, and let me tell you, it's a dream. It is a tool that costs something. However, for the speaker that's getting the information from it, it's fairly valuable information. In a nutshell, you come up with these questions that you have from the audience, and you can put a QR code up on the screen. And everybody has one of these, right? And they can just take a picture of it, and there'll be a series of questions, and you can design it. A
yeah.
series of questions, and at the end, you can actually give them a reward. Like I spoke at Liberty University last week, and I gave my slides as the reward.
Yeah.
So anybody and I got some great comments. Not all of them were great, but I had some great comments.
Mhm.
And remember that every speaker, uh, every once in a while, flubs up. And I'm going to tell you what my flub up was at Liberty University. First of all, I didn't realize it's a dry university. There is not a drop of alcohol
Ah.
on the campus. And this one student gave a really good answer to a question that I had. And I said, "Oh, I'll buy you a drink later." Oh, my goodness. Let me tell you, I will never do that again at Liberty University. And that was something that I didn't find out from the sponsor. I,
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
thought he might have told me that, but he didn't. So that was it.
Yeah.
So, and I tried out a joke. I tried out another joke that didn't go over well, and I heard about it in the evaluation.
Yeah.
You also
Jokes are very difficult,
you have to be careful.
especially yeah, especially if you're now I do a lot of speaking to international groups. Well,
Oh,
US humor is not the same as Italian humor or British humor or whatever.
exactly. There's a book that's been out for many years, and I should know the complete title, but it's basically "Shake Hands, Bow, or Something Else." That's that three again. But it talks about international audiences and how you have to be careful. So,
Yeah.
yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Mhm.
A couple of the other things: incorporate the improvements into future presentations,
Absolutely.
and then sometimes, and I this Talkadot, you have two options on emails. You can either require the people that do the evaluations to put in their name and email first, or you can do what I did with the students there at Liberty University. I gave them the option. if
Mm.
they want to, for in my case, it was my newsletter. It comes out every week. If they want to be on the newsletter list, so those people that there were about 13 people that wanted to get the email list. So now they're on my list, and they'll getting the email, and they can unsubscribe whenever they want, type thing. So,
Great.
so
And it automatically qualifies your list to yourself. In other words, the person has actually made a conscious choice.
oh yes, yes. You want to be very careful about that,
Yeah.
and yeah. Okay.
Well, there's something else that you talked about earlier, and of course, it's an area of my interest, keen interest, and has been for many years.
Mhm.
That use of story. And my
Oh,
question to you is, why do you think stories are so effective when you bring them into a talk?
well, in one sentence, I can tell you that, and then I'm going to give you more detail. And
Okay.
one sentence is everybody loves a good story. Everybody loves a good story. And if you look at the interactions that we have between us, our daily interactions, a lot of them revolve around stories. It's
Mhm.
pretty amazing. If you look at the news, everything is a story, right?
Mhm.
Now, what is it about stories? First of all, stories draw people together since humans were first appeared on the earth. In
Mhm.
fact, that's how the first history was happened. It was the stories that down through the generations. Okay, stories also tug at our emotions.
Mhm.
And whenever we're emotionally, our emotions get not rattled, but get twinged,
Evoked.
evoked. Thank you. That's a good word. Uh, or where we have a skin in the game, so to speak. So that's really important. And also stories to have a story. There's a great book. A guy named Donald Miller has written a series of books on story. Story Brand is his company, but and he says that each story has to have a hero. Okay, and he does coaching, so he says the coach is the guide. There's always a guide, like in Star Wars with Luke Skywalker. There was
Yep.
Obi-Wan Kenobi, that type of thing. And the hero has to face a challenge, sometimes a life and death challenge.
Mhm.
It may not be in all stories, but there's a challenge that they have to overcome. And what the guide advises the hero on or heroine has to be integral as to why the hero overcomes that
Yeah.
overcomes that challenge. And there are some movies where the hero doesn't overcome the challenge, and I bet they're not big box office hits.
Well, now we talked about international things and differences. And one of the things that I'll never forget, I had a woman in one of my talks, and she was from Holland. And and I talked about the fact that Americans love to have happy endings in our movies. I said, but I don't think Europeans feel the same way. And she said, you're absolutely right, Madeline. We don't care about that so much.
Well, and that's probably why their movies don't sell over here that well, or our movies
Could
don't
be.
sell over there very well.
I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Oh, it's actually yeah. Stories also have suspense.
Hmm.
We are it's sort of like a crossword puzzle or a cryptogram. You want to see how it ends up. And the twist. That's how jokes work or
Hmm.
humor works. The audience is going down one road, and all of a sudden we take them down another road.
Another road. Yeah,
And that's how that works, and it works in stories too.
absolutely.
Some of them are predictable. I hope I can say this on your TV program, but I guess I like to see the Hallmark movies, but my daughter was like, Dad, they all end the same way, and something's still drawing me to these movies, but mostly Christmas movies. But anyway, that's really what it comes down to. But there's a couple of things that have to happen in these stories. Number one, they have to be relevant
Hmm.
what you're talking about.
Yep.
It can't just be a great joke that people are laughing at. The whole presentation cannot be stories.
That's right.
Your audience is looking for your original thoughts. In fact,
Mhm.
you have to be careful when you bring in quotes and stories about other people. People come to see what are your thoughts. And if your thoughts don't get out there, then people will feel like they're shortchanged.
Yeah.
They could because they'll be thinking, well, I could read it in a book, right?
Yeah.
or I could see it in this movie, or that kind of thing. And too many stories can distract your audience from what your message is. So you have to
Mhm.
judiciously use stories.
Yeah.
I use them maybe at the beginning, maybe at the end, and maybe one in the middle someplace. But like for each main point, I wouldn't have a story. Maybe one of the main points.
Mhm.
You have to think about that way.
I think
Story,
sometimes a story is good when you need an example to
absolutely,
show that there's impact or whatever. Yeah.
absolutely. There's sometimes we talk about concepts in our presentations that need an explanation, and examples are always great.
Yep.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt that they are great.
Yep.
So yeah, the stories really, and personal stories are the best, again, because the audience is going to be totally convinced that it's true because you went through it.
Because you went through it. That's
Right.
right.
I have an example story. And I did tell it at one of the sessions that I had I won't be long with it, at Liberty University. Uh, this 9-year-old boy and his family, it was his brother, uh, his mother, his father, and his grandparents were going to see his uncle in Long Island, and they had a huge pot of tomato sauce in the trunk. So the dad, he goes on the bridge, and at the end of the bridge was actually a fork. Not common, but it does happen. Well, guess what? He took the wrong fork. So what do you think he tried to do?
A Yui.
Tried to back. Well, he was past the other fork, so he tried to back up. Somebody came down, did not realize they were backing up, plowed into the car, turned the car over.
Mm.
That's how bad it was. Turned the car over. And then as I got out of the car and I was walking around and saw all that sauce that was messed up, I was crying because all the sauce was, it was me in the car. It was pretty amazing. God was with us that day. Uh,
Wow.
but uh, and but you have to pull a point out of that story. And the point that I pulled out was that sometimes what people think is true or what people are driving at is really not what the real story is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's an example of that.
Great. Well, I want to shift gears slightly
Okay.
because I want to make sure we cover this particular topic. And when I prepare these, by the way, for these shows, I always have teenagers give me questions.
Hmm.
This is a question from a teenager, and I think it's a perfect question. How can you prepare and relax directly before public speaking so that you know that you're let's face it, you go into it and you may be all rehearsed and practiced and you're still nervous. What are some things you can do to get your body set to go on stage?
Well, I'll tell you one thing you can do before and one thing you can do when you start out. First thing before is take a deep breath
Mhm.
and think positive thoughts. This is sometimes easier said than done. You have prepared for this. You have gone through how many practices, hopefully,
Mhm.
through this. There's a whole audience that is going to hang on every word that you say. You have something important to say. And taking a deep breath works. When you get up to the lectern and you're going to give your presentation or out there near the audience, just survey them. Don't say anything right off the bat. Just survey them and smile.
Mhm.
See how many people smile with you. There'll probably be a whole lot of people smiling with you. That's what smiling does, right?
Mhm.
And then take a deep breath again and then go right into your speech.
Ah,
And this may sound pedantic or something a teacher would tell you, but enjoy it.
yeah.
You have something to say that other people want to know. And those are the two things I'd say just right off the bat. And realize that, again, 99%, maybe 99.9% of anything that you believe is going wrong in your presentation is totally missed by the audience. Totally
Mm.
missed by the audience. One of the biggest fears we have of speaking in front of an audience is of being embarrassed. And we think that we have done something wrong and everybody notices it. And the reality is almost
Yeah.
nobody notices it.
Yeah.
So there's a power in that,
Mhm.
uh, a power to be used, not abused. But there is a power in that, and really, it's you got to think back to the way you gave it in practice. Think back to the way you gave it in practice, and just do the same thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's even somewhat anticlimactic to give it in the actual presentation because you've given it so
Given
many
it so
times.
many times before.
Yeah, so many times before, and you will not give it the same way twice.
Yeah.
So, and the thing when you get with an audience is you are getting reactions from the audience. You are reacting to those audiences.
Mhm.
That's why I always tell everyone for every 5 to 7 minutes, let's say 7 minutes of your speech, I want you to practice it so you're off at 6 minutes. And the reason for that is that there are a lot of things that cause pauses in presentations with audiences, and you have to account for that. And the cardinal rule of speaking is never, ever be overtime. Never, ever be overtime.
Yeah. Well, speaking of overtime,
Yeah.
we have just a couple of minutes more, but I want to make sure that you have a chance. What's You've given so many amazing suggestions and tips and strategies, and of course, your book, I'm sure, gives lots more. Uh, let's pull it down to one piece of advice that you would give, so that my audience, um, when they're called to give a presentation, can feel more confident.
hmm It's going to sound kind of corny, but when I was first divorced, my mother gave me a book called by Norman Vincent Peale, Power of Positive Thinking.
Yeah.
Uh, but she gave me another book called You Can If You Think You Can. Most of the things I've done in my life have been fairly successful, not because I'm so unique, because I'm one of the maybe the few people that attempt to do it.
Mm.
Now, it doesn't mean I'm going to run a marathon. It doesn't mean I'm going to scale Mount Everest, but I can certainly talk to 500 or 1,000 people. What is the worst that can happen? What is the worst that can happen?
Mhm.
Not much.
Not
And believe me, you're going to come out thinking that was a pretty neat experience, whether you're an introvert, extrovert, or whether you want to give the presentation or not. So, believing in yourself. There's a couple of another great book, Psycho-Cybernetics by Dr. Maxwell Maltz. He was a plastic surgeon, and he talked about the dilemma that people had when he corrected an imperfection on their face or
mm,
other parts of their body. They still thought of themselves as ugly
uh,
because internally they
internally.
thought of themselves as ugly.
Yeah.
You can if you think you can.
Yeah. You can if you think you can. I love that. How can people get in touch with you, Frank?
Well, pretty easy. My website is speakleadandsucceed.com. And my email is frank at, you guessed it, speakleadandsucceed.com. On my website, if you go to where it says blog, there are probably about 250 to 300 blogs on there.
Great. Thank you so much,
Oh,
Frank.
you're welcome. You're welcome.
It's,
It's been delightful.
yeah, it's been such a pleasure and such good advice embedded in there. So thank you again.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Every now and then, there is something that changes how I think about the world. Grounds for Thought is a place where I talk about these moments so that you can explore the meaning for yourself. When I was about 5, I wasn't even in school yet. They asked me to sing a song to the whole school in the auditorium, up on the stage. And at 5, I sang a song about a tugboat named Little Toot. There must have been at least 100 people in the audience. Now, that's one way to begin speaking. A bit later in life, I was still getting up in front of audiences. When the audiences became more serious, I had to up my game. And I studied with several coaches over more than 15 years. Even so, I know that I have only just begun. But in the midst of all this preparation and delivery, I found a book that let me see a whole new universe of preparation. And it's a small book. It's a small book called, let me get that, there it is. Whoops. Theater Games for the Lone Actor, a Handbook by Viola Spolin. Now, anybody in the audience who's an actor knows exactly who Viola Spolin is. But not all of us are in that category. She is known for improvisational theater and is considered a true innovator of the 20th century American theater. Her focus was to help actors live and act in the present moment. That means that when the unexpected happens, they can improvise, whether on stage or in life. Now, when you work hard to learn how to do something, you also want to be prepared when things don't go exactly how you would like them to. So when I encountered Viola Spolin's little book of exercises, I knew I had something that not only was valuable for me, but was also something that I could do for myself. In her book, she talks about side coaching. She says, side coaching is a guide, a directive, a support, a catalyst, a higher view, an inner voice, an extended hand. You might say, given during the playing of a game to help you stay on focus. I love that. Side coaching helps you stay on focus. To me, this was another way to describe what I have often asked of my clients. Observe yourself with the idea that you use your observations to improve whatever it is you're trying to do. I'll give you an example. I've worked with many organizations on the issues of gender and improving gender bias in workplaces. And leaders often fretted to me that they were uncertain if they would always say the right thing the right way. My advice to them was to always observe their actions, and that if they did that, they would begin to see when they had acted with bias. And if they continued to observe, they would learn to see their bias in the midst of the action. And eventually, they would see the potential bias in an intended action before they even did it. At this point, they could decide if they wished to continue with such behavior or not. Just knowing that they had a path that would lead them to improve behavior gave them ease without taking the responsibility away from them for doing the right thing. So let's return to Spolin. She gave side coaching so many ways to observe. It became a very rich activity. I actually counted 57 games in her book where you can play the game and then side coach yourself. And here's one game that can be described easily. It's called Spacewalk 1. Now, the focus of the game is on feeling the space with the whole body. And to do it, you walk around the room and you feel the space. You feel the space around you and against you. Physically investigate it as an unknown substance. After doing this, you do some side coaching, such as, now, walk and let the space feel you. So I can tell you that your awareness of yourself and the space around you deepens and expands at the same time. All you want to do when you read this book is get up and do something. I hope that some of you may try doing some spacewalking. If nothing else, it will remind you that when you speak, the words are only a part of it. Your body does the speaking. Anyone in the audience who has studied acting knows that this isn't even the tip of the iceberg of what can be done to prepare the body for speaking or acting or living. But it is something to use to stimulate your thinking and grounds for thought is all about stimulating thinking. So what are your thoughts right now about walking in space? Theater Games for the Lone Actor, a Handbook by Viola Spolin. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you have enjoyed the conversation and learned something new. If you'd like to explore what it means to turbocharge the resilient leader in you, go to my website and schedule a conversation with me. And if you're on YouTube, please click the like button, and better yet, subscribe. I'm Madeline Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you refresh that leadership person within you.